You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello once again to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And yes, you guessed it, we have another ghost story. Actually, this is more of a haunted house, I guess, than a ghost story, but it is ghosts and it is a story, so it is a ghost story about a haunted house. It takes place in England, and we'll cover all the details, but it's actually considered one of the most famous haunted houses in England, investigated by the late famous paranormal researcher Harry Price, and it even has some connections to Ed and Lorraine Warren. It's actually interesting because I was on a trip to England, 3 years ago, and we were supposed to stop. The actual house itself was torn down in 1944, but there's a church across the street. We were supposed to stop and go investigate and go inside the church. There's a graveyard outside. Turns out, at the last minute, the vicar who runs the church had cold feet and said we weren't allowed inside, but we could look around outside in the graveyard on the grounds. And we thought, well, it kind of takes away from the whole point. So we actually ended up not going to Borley Rectory or Borley Church after all, which is okay. We went someplace kind of cool just as easily. But I always wonder, I would love to still go inside the church, do a little investigation, look around, go to the ruins of the house, but maybe for another time and another day and another trip.
I really hope you get to, because after reading some of the takes on this and seeing some clips about it, I'd like to see your take on it and how different it is. And another thing about this story is that most people know Ed and Lorraine Warren, but I don't think Harry Price is talked about too much.
He used to be, because he used to write his own books and articles. But I think because he died in the 50s, like 6 years after it was demolished. So
I was hoping he was still alive. I'd like to get him on the show.
No.
That's too bad.
1950 is when he died then.
Oh, long time ago.
Which is why a lot of people don't know who he is, because he died so long ago.
Yeah.
He's kind of the Ed and Lorraine Warren of his day, from what I understand. He was part of the Society of Psychical Research. You got to wonder about some of the guys that were part of this group now, because I know he tend to have an imagination and sensationalize, just like the Warrens did. So you got to wonder, like other people that used to be part of the psychical research group, how much did they,
sensationalize, and how much of the true story did they put in? But
yeah, exactly.
When I heard him talking, he sounds serious, and he sounds serious when I heard him talking. He sounded like he was trying to display the facts. And
yeah, I've seen a documentary on him that made him seem more like a little P.T. Barnum-ish. Like he would definitely hand it up for the reporters that he would be interviewed by, and
so his tone was a little different in some documentaries. Okay.
Exactly. Okay, let's go ahead and start this off. You want to go ahead and get it going?
Yeah. Right. Borley Rectory, it was a house called the most haunted house in England after being described as such by psychic researcher Harry Price. It was built in 1862 to house the rector of the parish of Borley and his family. It was badly damaged by fire in 1939, and it was demolished in 1944. And it was a Gothic-style rectory in the village of Borley, and it was alleged to have been haunted ever since it was built. And the reports started multiplying a lot back in 1929 after the Daily Mirror published an account of a visit by paranormal researcher Harry Price, who wrote 2 books supporting claims of paranormal activity. So Price's reports prompted a formal study by the Society for Psychical Research, which rejected most of the sightings as either imagined or fabricated, and they casted doubt on his credibility. His claims are now generally discredited by most ghost historians. However, neither the report nor the more recent biography of Price has brought up public interest in those stories. And new books and television and documentaries continue to satisfy the public with the rectory. And they satisfy their fascination with it. So a short program that was commissioned by the BBC about the manifestations scheduled to be broadcast in September 1956 was canceled, owing to concerns about a possible legal action by Marion Foister, who was the widow of the last rector to live in the house. So Borley Rectory, it was built on Hall Road near Borley Church by the Reverend Harry Dawson Ellis Bull in 1862. He moved in a year after being named rector of the parish. The house replaced an earlier rectory on the site that had been destroyed by fire in 1841. It was eventually enlarged by the addition of a wing to house his family of 14 children. And the nearby church that may date from the 12th century serves a scattered rural community that makes up the parish. There are several substantial farmhouses and the remains of Borley Hall, once the seat of the Waldegrave family. Ghost hunters quote the legend of a Benedictine monastery supposedly built in this area in about 1362, according to which a monk from the monastery conducted a relationship with a nun from a nearby convent, which was, taboo in those days.
Mm-hmm.
After their affair was discovered, the monk was executed and the nun was bricked up alive in the convent walls. It was confirmed in 1938 that the legend had no historical basis and seemed to have been fabricated by the rector's children to romanticize their Gothic-style red brick rectory. And the story of the walling up of the nun may have came up from Rider Haggard's novel Montezuma's Daughter, which was published in 1893, or Walter Scott's epic poem, A Marmion, which was published in 1808. And interesting enough, I have a copy of Marmion. I should look that up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, as far as the paranormal, the first paranormal events reportedly occurred in about 1863, since a few locals later remembered having heard unexplained footsteps within the house at about that time. On July 28th of 1900, 4 daughters of the rector, Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, saw that they thought was the ghost of a nun at twilight about 40 yards from the house. They tried to talk to it, but it disappeared as they got closer. Now, the local organist Ernest Ambrose later said that the family at the rectory were very convinced that they'd seen an apparition on several occasions. Various people claim to have witnessed a variety of puzzling incidents, such as a phantom coach driven by 2 headless horsemen during the next 4 decades. Bull died in 1892, and his son, the Reverend Harry Foister Bull, took over the living. On June 9th, 1927, Harry Bull died, and the rectory again became vacant. Now, in the following year, on the 2nd day of October, the Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife moved into the house, and soon after moving in, Smith's wife, while cleaning out a cupboard, came across a brown paper package containing the skull of a young woman. Now, shortly after, the family reported a variety of incidents, including the sounds of servant bells ringing despite their being disconnected, lights appearing in windows, and unexplained footsteps. In addition, Smith's wife believed she saw a horse-drawn carriage at night. The Smiths contacted the Daily Mirror asking to be put in touch with the Society for Psychical Research, and on June 10, 1929, the newspaper sent a reporter who promptly wrote the first in a series of articles detailing the mysteries of Borley. The paper also arranged for Harry Price, a paranormal researcher, to make his first visit to the house. Now, he arrived on June 12th, and immediately phenomena of a new kind appeared, such as the throwing of stones, a vase, and other objects. Spirit messages were tapped out from the frame of a mirror, and as soon as Price left, these ceased. Smith's wife later maintained that she had already suspected Price, an expert conjurer, of falsifying the activity. Now, the Smiths left Borley on July 14, 1929, and the parish had some difficulty finding a replacement. The following year, the Reverend Lionel Algernon Foister, 1878 to 1945, a first cousin of the Bowles, and his wife Marianne moved into the rectory with their adopted daughter Adelaide on October 16, 1930. Now, Lionel Foister wrote an account of various strange incidents that occurred between the time the Foisters moved in and October 1935, which was sent to Harry Price. Now, these included bells ringing, windows shattering, throwing of stones and bottles, wall writing, and the locking of their daughter in a room with no key. Marianne Foister reported to her husband a whole range of poltergeist phenomena that included her being thrown from her bed. On one occasion, Adelaide was attacked by something horrible. Foister tried twice to conduct an exorcism, but his efforts were fruitless. In the middle of the first exorcism, he was struck on the shoulder by a fist-sized stone. Because of the publicity in the Daily Mirror, these incidents attracted the attention of several psychic researchers, who, after investigation, were unanimous in suspecting that they were caused, consciously or unconsciously, by Marianne Foister. She later said she felt that some of the incidents were caused by her husband in concert with one of the psychic researchers, but other events appeared to be genuinely paranormal phenomena. She later admitted she was having a sexual relationship with the lodger Frank Perlis, and that she used paranormal explanations to cover up her liaisons. The Foisters left the Borley Rectory in October 1935 as a result of Lionel Foister's ill health. Now, in enters Harry Price. Borley remained vacant for some time after Foister's departure. In May of 1937, so this would be about 7 years.
Right.
No, about 2 years. So they left in 35. It was in May of 37 that Price took out a year-long rental agreement with the Queen Anne's Bounty, the owners of the property. Now, through an advertisement in the Times, May 25th, 1937, and subsequent personal interviews, Price recruited a corps of 48 official observers, mostly students who spent periods, mainly during weekends, at the rectory with instructions to report any phenomenon that occurred. In March 1938, Helen Glanville, the daughter of S.J. Glanville, one of Price's helpers, conducted a planchette seance in Streatham, in South London. Price reported that she made contact with two spirits, the first of which was that of a young nun who identified herself as Marie Lair. According to the planchette story, Marie was a French nun who left her religious order, traveled to England to marry a member of the Waldegrave family, the owners of the Borley's 17th century manor house, Borley Hall. She was said to have been murdered in an older building on the site of the rectory, and her body either buried in the cellar or thrown into a disused well. The wall writings were allegedly to be her pleas for help, and one read, "Marianne, please help me out." The second spirit to be contacted identified himself as Summix Amours and claimed to be that he would set fire to the rectory at 9 o'clock that night, March 27, 1938. He also said at that time that the bones of a murdered person would then be revealed. Interesting.
That's very interesting. They were, I'll talk about this after we're done, but in May of 1976, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren visited Borley Church as they were both drawn to it. And here's the Warrens describing their encounter at the Borley Church, which resides nearby where the rectory once stood.
The first experience for me was phenomenal. It was really phenomenal. It's about the only place, Tony, other than going into a home where poltergeist activity is prominent, that everything happens as soon as you get involved. As soon as you walk in, as soon as you get involved in going into this church and beginning your research, something is bound to happen. Now, that first day, I had a very skeptical researcher with me. He was a newspaper man from Danbury, and he was obnoxiously skeptical. But he was keeping a full diary for me, so he was very, very helpful. I worried about what his effect was going to have on this building. So I was in and I was discerning. I was standing down by the altar. I was with a group of people, and I was discerning. When all of a sudden, he came charging in through the back door. And he said, "Something is hitting me. It's hitting me. It's hitting me." And he was absolutely hysterical. He was hysterical. Now, at that point, he said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe."
Now, Lorraine, was this researcher psychic by any chance?
No,
He wasn't
by
psychic?
no means. Oh, by no.
He had never been in a haunted.
He had never been to a haunted area, Tony.
Okay.
And the recorders are on because people are recording what I'm discerning. Now, later at our hotel in London, he came down to my room and said, "Mrs. Warren, it's going to be impossible for me to write anything about that church that we were in." I said, "Borley?" He said, "Yes." He said, "The tape that you gave me where you were discerning," he said, "you can hear when I come in the room, and I'd like to play it for you." Now, when he, or into the church. Now, when he walked in, and he was yelling like that, a voice, a woman's voice, as he said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," said, "Hit him, hit him," almost in a healing way. And you hear her very gentle voice.
Now, this is a spirit voice that she's talking about.
Now, this was the first day. Now, when I was leaving the church, I knew something about the background of it. That's why we were drawn there. I knew that there was a nun that was buried in the walls of the building. I knew her remains had been found, and that it was buried at a graveyard very close in Liston churchyard. I knew all about that. So I said, maybe before we go back to London, see, this is about 45 minutes outside of London, as you remember, Tony.
Right.
And I said, maybe we should go to Liston first. It was a bitter cold night. This was in January.
What year was it?
1976. And so we went to Liston, and the photographer who I had with me, he was froze. We were all froze. But something told me to have him get out and snap some pictures. We really got outstanding psychic photographs at Liston. In fact, Tony, in our book, The Demonologist, it tells about that particular day when I went there for the first time, and it shows the psychic photograph where you see a stone that forms a cross, and it's glowing. It's glowing as if you had bright lights on it, and no lights, of course, were on it at all. It's in a very, very rural area.
I have to tell you that this particular house, the most haunted house in England, which was written by Harry Price, he was your very earliest of Ghostbusters, very famous man. That I was in the Navy, I was 17 years old, I picked up a book on a ship, and there it was, the most haunted house in England. Well, since I lived in a haunted house as a boy, I was intrigued. And I said to myself, if ever I come back again to England, I've got to visit that house. And we did. And every year Lorraine and I visit it. And the first time that Lorraine and I went together was the following year.
No, the following May, honey.
So I said,
Yes.
the following year.
Yeah.
1970.
76. Yes, 76,
And-
the same year.
And we went with two young women who were clairvoyants. Actually, one was a psychic photographer, the other was a clairvoyant. And I'll never forget that night. We had to get permission to go into the church. So who did I send up? Lorraine. She goes up to the caretakers, and she knocks on the door. I'll never forget it. A woman comes out, and I thought, she's not going to get us in. But then I knew that her Irish charm would do it. All of a sudden, she comes out. She's holding this big key up in her hand.
Great big key like this, Tony.
So I said, okay, we'll come back after 10 o'clock at night. Now, as you know, Tony, in England, it gets dark very late. As you get further north you go up, it's very light until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So when we got up there, it was already getting twilight. It was pretty dark. So we go over there, and I'll never forget putting the key into that ancient door.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
A little sensationalistic, but we're kind of used to that from the Warrens.
We're used to that, yeah. Now, I believe that the story was also the basis for the Hollywood film, which is connected with other cases from the Warrens called The Nun. And it's a beautiful church. What a beautiful building. Look at that.
Yeah, it's a shame that it burned down, the actual rectory. I guess the church is across the street from the rectory.
Yeah,
it's a shame. It's a shame that the rectory actually burned down. It looks like a pretty giant house originally.
I know, it's gorgeous. Yeah. So, well, here's my take on this about the fact that a monastery was built before the rectory was, and the fact that they came across all of these ghosts who were former inmates of the monastery, as well as the rectory. Is that religious orders were very, very well known for keeping records, lots of records, and detailed records. And so were manor houses. They were known for keeping records of the people who lived there, how long, how many generations, how many people lived in each place, and of course all the people who used to run the parish back then. There was tons of records on these estates. And including in monasteries. So it would have been very easy to go back to the records and find the names of these supposed EVPs or ghosts that they had a name for, and see if they can connect the story with the actual records.
Well, they didn't mention that they had any. I mean, there was a lot of speculation, because you got to remember, so it was the site of a monastery. They said in the area. They didn't say it was necessarily the same grounds as the rectory.
Yeah.
That could have burned down. You wouldn't have records if it burned down.
If it was burned down, they couldn't have, no.
And they had another rectory before this one that burned down just 7 years or something before.
Well, but they would have transferred the monastery records to someplace else, not the rectory, though.
Maybe. We don't know. We don't know that for sure. We can't. We don't know. I'm just saying that I don't know that anybody.
Or church records, even church records would have it.
What I'm thinking is, it says before Harry Price came, they'd already written several articles about it. So somebody already wrote about it before Harry even came into it. And he did write a book called The Most Haunted House in England. Harry Price wrote a book about this whole case. He might mention all that in the book. I haven't read the book, but I'd be curious to read it.
I would be too.
But he may have mentioned what he found. He may have found names. He may have found incidents. I know that the actual, what did they say? They did do I think it was Harry Price or someone, after it was demolished, they did go back and kind of comb through the rubble, and they said they could find 2 bones that Harry Price claimed were from a woman, to try and back up the fact that he says a nun was holed up in the wall. Later on, I guess most of the people in the area said no, those 2 bones were actually just a pig. They were pig bones.
Well, now they could do DNA and analysis of the bones.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where the bones are. I don't know if they exist still. You never know.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I don't know. I think, and I guess one of the last reverend who lived there with his wife, she said she was sensationalizing things, and she said to cover up her affair. I guess she did a lot of that stuff where she was claiming things that didn't necessarily happen. But that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't necessarily mean things didn't happen before that were relevant. It's just sometimes people will get a hold of this and think
they'll embellish.
How can I get some attention out of this? And let me embellish. Isn't this a funny lark? Let me see how far I can go with this where people will believe me. I could see her saying, you know what? Let me use this place to cover up my affair and just make stuff up. And I guess her husband was nonetheless, obviously, if she's having an affair behind his back, with a lodger in the same house.
Right.
And I guess he was a lot older. He was old enough to be her father, so he was kind of a doddery reverend with his young wife, who obviously was bored to tears being there. But
I did read that she was a lot younger than him.
Yeah. So I mean, it's too bad the BBC didn't do their short piece on it in the 50s, because that might have been interesting just to see what they would have done. But if it was demolished in 44, I'm wondering if, because I saw other pictures of the ruins that said, oh, here's a picture of the Borley Rectory in 1984. I wonder if it was demolished in 44, but if there was still some of it still standing later on. But I can't see that they would leave part of it standing if it was demolished.
Well, I was reading some comments about the nearby residents who live near the area, and they said that they go by there all the time. And this one person claimed that he went by there and he saw some children playing in the fields nearby where the church is, and where the rectory was. And he was going to walk up to the children to ask if they've seen anything. He was just going to ask them a question. And the closer he walked up, they disappeared.
Oh, the children?
The children disappeared. Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's I'm sure there's activity up there. I would like it if somebody did a updated version of what's going on there, since it's so famous.
Yeah.
And obviously we have more of these investigations that are more realistic these days. Oh, not that they weren't realistic then, but there's nothing to sensationalize anymore. So or there's nothing to cover up, and you know what I mean.
Yep.
Like an affair or something, and somebody admitting it or whatever. But somebody doing something updated and being very factual, and then getting something that they find and showing it.
Yep. Now
I think it would be great.
The movie, like I said, the movie The Nun, that based it on this real story. So the only thing they use is the nun going to the convent, having being killed and that kind of stuff. There's very little in the movie that's from this real story, but obviously they took what they wanted. And you saw the claim on that clip that I think the Warrens, I doubt they visited that many times. I know we were seeing claims of 2,000 times and 200, and I have a hunch they probably went a lot, because obviously there was a lot of activity every time they went. They thought we should go back since we're in England and check on it. I don't believe that they did 200. I don't believe they did 2,000 visits.
That's a lot.
Probably a dozen, maybe, sounds more realistic.
Right, because the other number is too excessive, I think. But
yeah,
I don't doubt that they captured things and that they were very serious about their investigations. I'm not trying to put these people down, but I'm just saying that that a lot of what goes on now could be a lot quieter, and maybe not so. There's no residents there to interfere or talk about things.
Yeah, since they wouldn't let us even into the church, I have a hunch they don't let any investigating teams anywhere into the church. And on the property where the rectory was, it's probably part of the church. So they probably aren't allowed on the grounds either.
Right.
So it's hard to say if anyone's going to ever get in there, because the church just doesn't want people poking around.
Right, because of the sensationalism connected with it and everything. Yeah.
It's a shame, because I would love to see one of these TV shows, even an English TV show, do a live investigation, or just send a real team in to do a real investigation, not even a fake TV investigation, quote unquote.
Now, the church is still open for services, and people still go, like on a Sunday, don't they?
Yeah, you can still go to the church, but not just to go in just to investigate, or
Shoot, you could have just told your group you're going to church and go in there.
Well, I think it was a weekday, and all we would have done, we did this with another church. There was another story about the black dog from the 1600s, which is a whole different part of England. But all we did was, we would have just walked into the church. We would have took pictures, just looked around a little bit, heard some history about it, and walked the grounds, and we would have got on the bus and left. That's all we would have done. But the fact that this vicar, this reverend, wouldn't have let us in at all, it's kind of disappointing because I would have loved to at least seen the church and maybe see the grounds where the rectory was.
Mm-hmm.
But,
well, I'm looking at my copy of Marmion, and there's a chapter called The Convent, and I'm wondering if that's where they talk about this nun.
I bet you that is. I bet you that's exactly what it's from. So, and of course, the Reverend's daughters are reading these books and are probably taking these little. Let's take this. Let's say that there was a nun, and she had an affair, and she was boarded up inside. Why would you be boarded up inside a wall, even if you're in a convent? I know that when a nun got pregnant, sometimes they would find bones or something of children's bones in the basement of some of these convents. But why would you wall a nun up?
Well, here's a verse from Marmion where they could be talking about her here. Not I say here of Sister Clare, save this, that she was young and fair, as yet a novice unprofessed, lovely and gentle, but distressed. She was betrothed to one now dead, or worse, who had dishonored fled. Her kinsman bade her give her hand to one who loved her for her land. Herself almost heartbroken now, was bent to take the vestal vow, and shroud within St. Hilda's gloom her blasted hopes and withered bloom. That was from Marmion, so they could be talking about her.
Yeah, I could see how they could mix all this stuff together. The whole walling up of the nun, though, that's the part that seems just way too sensationalistic. And it sounds like Harry Price believed it hook, line, and sinker, and I think the Warrens believed it pretty much too.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you have, like you said, I mean, obviously she came from another convent, so wouldn't they have records of her? Wouldn't they have records of the monk?
In the other convent, they would. Oh, yeah, because these convents, like, as I mentioned, these monasteries and convents were famous for their records. They were famous for keeping records in detail.
Yep, exactly.
They could find a Marie Laire, or whatever her name was. Isn't it Marie Laire? Lairre?
Yeah.
Yeah, they could find her.
I'd be curious now to read Harry Price's book, The Most Haunted House in England, just to see if he did any of that research and actually the names and stuff. And I know a lot of historians now, investigators, ghost hunters, and investigators, just like they said, they don't believe most of what he wrote. But I'd be curious to read it just to see what he found. Is he just going by suggestion, hypothesis, whatever? But I have the hunch the Warrens latched onto his book and just believed whatever he wrote, and then they just added on top of it.
Sure.
But that one story where Lorraine was talking about how that reporter who was taking her notes for her, kind of the diary of their investigation, how he had that recording he had. Stuff like that would be interesting to listen to. I would love to hear that.
Yeah, and I've never read Montezuma's Daughter, so I don't know the contents of that. But you know, a lot of these names and a lot of these, it's always good to investigate where, what was on a building site before this one. Yep. Where do these names come from? How did they? And to go back to records, and England is very known for their records. In these big estates, as I mentioned, and sometimes I admit sometimes you can't always get the whole story because what you're capturing from EVPs can be little fragmented sentences. I don't think they did EVP. They did EVPs back then, didn't they? Lorraine.
No, they did. That's if you
because you played a clip. You played a clip. Yeah.
In that interview, she talks about how the reporter he made a recording of as he bolted back into the rectory to tell Lorraine that they hit me. They heard that woman in the background of him saying hit him, hit him. So obviously, that's obviously an EVP recording. I don't think he intended to to record in that way. I think he was just recording for his own note taking. But let's face it, he was recording an EVP in '76, whether he realized he was or not, because he was really skeptical. But the fact that they got that recording obviously was enough for Lorraine to remember. That's all. Right. That's like she says. That's all detailed in her book, The Demonologist, by the Warrens. So that might be another book to read to get more.
Another book, yeah. Yeah, and I don't doubt they got some credible EVPs. In fact, wasn't Ed and Lorraine one of the first people to actually get EVPs when all of this was starting? When they were starting to investigate cases?
Every time I read about them, I rarely hear about them recording EVPs. I think other people around them are recording when they do their seances. When they do all that kind of stuff, they're recording just in general for like newspapers. I think, but I don't. I don't remember reading of them specifically recording for that purpose.
Okay, because I know the old-fashioned way of doing it, and this was from a long time ago. From what I can understand, was to leave a tape recorder on in a place and just to have a good ear and put your headphones on. For your old-fashioned tape recorder, and then you can hear sounds come in, and that's what people used to do.
Now, the one reverend who lived there with his wife, the one with the younger wife, he actually left microphone or tape recorders in the rectory and recorded all kinds of sounds, the organs, stomping, stone pebbles on the floor. He recorded all that stuff himself, so even he thought of doing that stuff before they left.
Right, so, and that lends to the credibility of the hauntings. So
exactly,
I think there was capture that.
I think there was something there. I just think Harry Price and the Warrens, again, blow it up a little, make direct attention to it a little more, kind of pull a little bit of fame out of it. I think it's sensationalized, but again, the core I think is still there. Was still there.
Right, and we obviously don't have the whole story, so. But that's usually the way it is. It takes time to get the whole story, and it's an interesting journey when you do. So, I'd like to see some updated info on it, and maybe one of these days we will.
There actually is I noticed there's a trailer for a new movie from last year called, was it The Haunting of the Borley Rectory? Look, the movie trailer looks pretty good. You should look it up on YouTube, The Haunting of the Borley Rectory. I'll put it on our Facebook page as well.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, so that the listeners can take a look.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and put the whole Ed and Lorraine Warren little interview clip on there, as well as a couple others. But the movie looks pretty good. I mean, the actors don't look that hot as far as acting goes. The story that they're doing looks interesting, and it reminds me of The Nun, the new movie that came out a couple of years ago. Like I said, that these new Ed and Lorraine Warren movies. So if you haven't seen The Nun, you can actually go watch that. But now you know some of the basis for the Nun when you watch it.
Yeah.
But it was an okay movie.
I would like to actually see it.
It wasn't the best movie in the world, but
really?
I didn't think La Llorona was that good of a movie either. So.
Oh no, I didn't like that. I didn't like the way that came out.
But at least people know now.
I'd like to see another version of that was done more accurately. But that's for another subject. That's for another show. So.
But at least people know where the true story of the Nun came from. Now is from this Borley
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true. Okay.
Good story.
I'm glad we covered that. Yeah, great story. So
I've always wanted to go there, and I've always wanted to do an episode on it. So I'm glad we finally covered this.
Yeah, and I do hope you get a chance to go over there one of these days, and I'd like to visit there one of these days too. So. Yep,
absolutely. All right, folks, that's another episode for this week, and until next week, we're going to sign off and say goodbye. Bye.
Bye. See you next week.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.